Marcus Chun had always believed that kindness was free, even when everything else in the universe cost more than most people could afford. Standing behind the serving counter of his small food truck parked in the grimy docking bay of Titan Station, he watched the endless stream of beings from 100 different worlds shuffle past his humble establishment. Most didn't even glance his way. Humans, after all, were considered one of the newer and less significant species in the galactic community. The station buzzed with activity, as usual. Cargo haulers with their cybernetic arms moved containers twice their size, while sleek Zephyrian traders in their flowing robes negotiated deals in their musical language. The air recyclers worked overtime to filter out the mixture of atmospheres that different species required, creating a perpetual hum that had become the soundtrack of Marcus's life for the past 3 years. He wiped down the counter for the 100th time that day, checking his supplies. Business had been slow lately. The big corporate food chains had moved into the station 6 months ago, offering exotic delicacies from across the galaxy. Who wanted simple human food when you could have crystallized Andromedan nectar or fermented Proxima moss that supposedly enhanced your telepathic abilities? Still here, human. The voice belonged to Crix, a Thoraxian whose insectoid features always made Marcus think of a praying mantis crossed with a rhinoceros. Crix ran the scrap metal business 3 bays over and never missed an opportunity to remind Marcus of his species' lowly status in the galactic hierarchy. Still here, Marcus replied with a smile that he'd practiced until it looked genuine. Business is good. Crix's compound eyes reflected the neon lights of the station. Lying doesn't suit your primitive features. I heard the station administrator is looking for a reason to revoke your license. Apparently, some species find human food disturbing. Marcus's grip tightened on the cleaning cloth, but his smile never wavered. Well, lucky for me, not everyone shares that opinion. As if summoned by his words, Marcus noticed her for the first time. An elderly figure shuffled between the cargo containers, moving so slowly that she seemed to be fighting against time itself. Her species was unfamiliar to him, which was saying something after 3 years of serving dozens of different alien races. Her skin had a translucent quality, like aged parchment, and strange symbols seemed to shift beneath its surface. She wore simple, worn clothing that might have once been elegant, but now looked like it had survived several small wars. What struck Marcus most was how everyone else seemed to actively avoid her. Not in the obvious way people avoided someone dangerous or diseased, but in the unconscious way crowds parted around someone they simply didn't see. She was invisible in plain sight, a ghost among the living. She approached his counter with uncertain steps, her large, dark eyes studying the simple menu he'd written in universal script. Marcus had kept his offerings basic: grilled protein with vegetables, stewed legumes, bread that he'd baked fresh every morning, and his grandmother's soup recipe that he'd modified for various alien digestive systems. "Excuse me." Her voice was barely above a whisper, speaking universal standard with an accent he couldn't place. "How much for the soup?" Marcus glanced at the price board, then at her worn clothing and the way her hands trembled slightly from what might have been age or hunger. "For you? It's on the house." Her eyes widened, those dark orbs reflecting a depth that seemed to contain starlight. "On the house? I don't understand this expression." "It means free. No charge." Marcus ladled his grandmother's soup into a biodegradable container, the rich aroma filling the small space. The soup was his pride, a perfect blend of human comfort food adapted for most alien physiologies. "Would you like some bread with that?" "Free." She repeated the word as if it were a foreign concept, more alien than any language barrier. "But why?" "You don't know me." Marcus shrugged, adding a generous piece of his fresh-baked bread to her order. "Does that matter? You look hungry, and I have food. Sometimes it's that simple." He handed her the container and watched as she cradled it like something precious. The warmth from the soup seemed to bring color back to her translucent skin, and for a moment, those strange symbols beneath the surface pulsed with what looked like golden light. "What is your name?" "Kind human," she asked, her voice stronger now. "Marcus Chun." "What's yours?" She hesitated, as if the question had layers of complexity he couldn't fathom. You may call me Vera. And this soup, what do you call it? Just grandmother's soup. Nothing fancy. My grandmother used to make it for me when I was sick or sad. She said it could fix almost anything except a broken heart. And even then, it helped a little. Vera tasted the soup carefully, and Marcus watched her expression transform. It wasn't just satisfaction or hunger being fulfilled. It was something deeper, as if she was remembering what it felt like to be cared for. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman, Vera said softly. Is she still with you? She passed away before I left Earth. But I carry her recipes with me. Marcus gestured to his small kitchen setup. She always said food is love made edible. Vera nodded slowly, taking another spoonful. Around them, the station continued its chaotic dance of commerce and survival. But their corner had become a small island of peace. Love made edible. Yes, I can taste that. It has been very long since I experienced such a gift. You talk like you've been traveling for a while, Marcus observed, beginning to prepare another batch of soup for the dinner rush that might or might not come. Oh yes. Vera's eyes took on a distant quality. I have been traveling for longer than most stars have burned, searching for something I lost, or perhaps something I never had. She paused, studying Marcus with those ancient eyes. Tell me, Marcus Chun, what brought you to this place, so far from your homeworld? Marcus chopped vegetables as he spoke, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm. Adventure, I suppose. Earth is beautiful, but it's also crowded and complicated. I thought the galaxy would be different. Bigger opportunities, new experiences, a chance to prove that humans belong out here among the stars. And have you found what you were looking for? Marcus laughed, though there wasn't much humor in it. I've found that the galaxy is just as complicated as Earth, just in different ways. Humans are still newcomers out here. Most species see us as barely civilized. We're too aggressive for some, too primitive for others. Sometimes I think the only reason they tolerate us at all is because we make decent laborers and we're too stubborn to quit trying. Vera finished her soup and bread, carefully cleaning the container with a precision that spoke of long experience with making things last. And yet you remain, still cooking, still feeding whoever comes to your window. Where else would I go? Marcus asked. This is my life now. Maybe it's not glamorous, but it's mine. And sometimes, he gestured toward her empty container, sometimes I get to make someone's day a little better. That has to count for something. It counts for more than you know, Vera said quietly. She reached into her worn bag and pulled out what looked like a small, ordinary credit chip. Please, let me pay you. I insist. Marcus shook his head. I told you it's free. Come back anytime you're hungry, okay? I'm here every day except Galactic Standard Sunday. Vera stared at him for a long moment, those strange symbols beneath her skin pulsing with that golden light again. Marcus Chun, you've given me something precious today, more precious than you could possibly understand. I will not forget this kindness. There was something in her tone that made Marcus look up from his prep work. For just an instant, the elderly alien woman seemed different, larger somehow, as if the space around her had expanded. The air itself seemed to shimmer with possibility. But then she was just an old woman again, tired and grateful. I'll see you around, Vera, Marcus said. She nodded once, a gesture that somehow carried the weight of ceremony, and shuffled back into the crowd. Marcus watched her go, noting again how the other beings on the station seemed to unconsciously move out of her way without really noticing her presence. The rest of the day passed normally. Marcus served a few regular customers, a Martian cargo hauler who always ordered extra vegetables, a young Centaurian student who was homesick and found comfort in human food, and an old Terran miner who appreciated having someone to talk to in his native language. Normal people living normal lives in an extraordinary universe. That night, as Marcus cleaned his equipment and prepared to close up shop, he found himself thinking about Vera. There had been something about her that nagged at the edges of his consciousness. The way she spoke, as if she carried the weight of centuries in her voice. The symbols moving beneath her skin like living constellations. The strange shimmer in the air around her when she looked at him with those ancient eyes. He shook his head, dismissing his imagination. 3 years on a space station would make anyone see mysteries where none existed. She was just an old woman who was hungry, and he was just a human with soup. Simple as that. But as he locked up his truck and headed toward his small apartment in the station's residential sector, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just happened. Something that would change everything, though he couldn't imagine how. The station's artificial night cycle was beginning, dimming the harsh overhead lights to something resembling sunset. Marcus walked through corridors lined with shops and services catering to dozens of species. A Regelian music hall pumped out hypnotic rhythms that could induce euphoria in 12 different types of brain chemistry. A pharmaceutical shop advertised everything from human vitamins to Vulcan nerve enhancers. The diversity was staggering, but underneath it all was the same basic truth that applied to any community anywhere. Most people were just trying to get by. Back in his small apartment, Marcus heated up some leftover soup for himself and sat by the single window that looked out into space. Stars wheeled slowly past as the station rotated, each point of light potentially hosting worlds full of life and wonder. Somewhere out there was Earth, the little blue marble that had given birth to humanity's dreams of the stars. His grandmother would have loved this view. She'd always been fascinated by the night sky, even when light pollution made it hard to see more than the brightest stars from their apartment in New Shanghai. Every star is a sun, Marcus, she told him countless times. And maybe every sun has people looking back at us, wondering if they're alone. Well, now he knew they weren't alone. The galaxy was crowded with life, more diverse and wonderful than anyone on Earth had imagined. But it was also colder than he'd expected. Not physically cold, but emotionally distant. Most species kept to their own kind, trading with others when necessary, but rarely forming genuine connections across the vast differences in biology and culture. That's what made today special, he realized. The simple act of sharing soup with a stranger had created a moment of real connection. It didn't matter that Vera was probably from a species he'd never encountered before, or that she seemed to carry some kind of profound sadness. For a few minutes, they'd just been two beings sharing food and conversation. His grandmother would have approved. She'd always insisted that the kitchen was the heart of any home, and that no one should ever leave hungry if you had the power to feed them. Food is the universal language, she'd said. Everyone understands kindness served on a plate. Marcus finished his soup and prepared for bed, but sleep was elusive. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those strange symbols moving beneath Vera's translucent skin, pulsing with golden light like messages written in a language older than words. And her eyes, dark and deep as space itself, holding what looked like the weight of eternity. He'd probably never see her again. Titan Station was a hub for travelers from across the galaxy. People passed through constantly, heading to destinations Marcus could barely pronounce. The chances of one elderly alien woman returning to his humble food truck were minimal. But somehow, deep in his bones, Marcus knew that wasn't true. Something had been set in motion today, something that started with a simple bowl of soup and an act of uncomplicated kindness. He didn't know what it was or where it would lead, but he could feel it like a change in the weather. Outside his window, the stars continued their ancient dance, and somewhere among them, Marcus hoped Vera had found a safe place to rest for the night. Tomorrow he'd open his truck again, serve his simple food to whoever was hungry, and maybe make someone else's day a little brighter. It was a small thing, but as his grandmother always said, small kindnesses had a way of growing into something larger than anyone expected. Marcus just hoped he'd be ready for whatever came next. 3 days passed before Marcus saw Vera again, and when she returned, she wasn't alone. The elderly alien woman approached his food truck with slow, deliberate steps, followed by what could only be described as an entourage, though they tried very hard not to look like one. Marcus had just finished serving lunch to a group of Andromedran shipwrights when he noticed the strange procession. Vera moved at her usual shuffling pace, but now she was accompanied by beings who clearly didn't belong in the grimy commercial district of Titan Station. Their clothes were too fine, their bearing too confident, and they moved with the kind of controlled awareness that suggested extensive security training. There was a tall, crystalline being whose faceted surface reflected the station lights like a living prism. Beside him walked a creature that resembled a cross between a bear and a thundercloud, crackling with barely contained energy. A third figure appeared to be made entirely of flowing silver liquid, constantly shifting form, but maintaining a roughly humanoid shape. They all kept a respectful distance behind Vera, but their attention never wavered from their surroundings. "Hello again, Marcus-chun," Vera said as she approached the counter. Her voice was the same gentle whisper, but there was something different about her today. The symbols beneath her translucent skin were more active, pulsing with that golden light in complex patterns that almost looked like writing. "Vera," Marcus smiled, already reaching for the soup ladle. "Back for more grandmother's soup? If you would be so kind." She paused, glancing back at her companions who had arranged themselves in a loose perimeter around the food truck. "I brought some friends today. They were curious about the human who makes food with love." Marcus looked at the strange gathering and felt a flutter of nervousness. These beings radiated power in a way that made his primitive human instincts scream warnings. But Vera's gentle demeanor helped calm his racing heart. "Are they hungry too?" Marcus asked, beginning to prepare multiple portions. "We do not require sustenance." The crystalline being spoke, his voice like music played through crystal glasses. "We are here merely to observe." "To observe soup?" Marcus raised an eyebrow as he ladled the rich broth into containers. "Must be some soup." The bear-like creature rumbled with what might have been laughter. "You have no idea, human." As Marcus worked, he became aware that other beings on the station were beginning to notice the unusual gathering. Conversations grew quieter, and he could feel eyes watching from every direction. The crystalline being, the energy creature, and the liquid metal humanoid were clearly not ordinary travelers. Their very presence seemed to bend the space around them in subtle ways that made Marcus's vision blur if he looked at them directly. "Here you go." Marcus handed Vera her soup and bread, then prepared additional portions just in case. "On the house," as usual. Vera accepted the container with the same reverence as before, but this time she didn't immediately start eating. Instead, she held it carefully and turned to her companions. "Observe," she said simply. What happened next defied every law of physics Marcus thought he understood. As Vera lifted the spoon to her lips, the symbols beneath her skin began to glow more brightly, and the air around her shimmered like heat waves rising from summer pavement. But it wasn't heat Marcus felt. It was something else entirely. Something that made his soul feel warm and his eyes water with sudden emotion. The crystalline being's faceted surface began to reflect not the harsh artificial lights of the station, but something that looked like dawn breaking over an alien world. The energy creature's crackling subsided, replaced by a gentle luminescence that felt peaceful rather than dangerous. The liquid metal being took on a more stable form, as if the chaos of constant change had found a moment of perfect balance. And throughout it all, Marcus could swear he heard music. Not the harsh electronic sounds of the station or the alien melodies from the various shops, but something ancient and profound, like the song the universe might sing to itself in quiet moments. "Remarkable," the crystalline being whispered. "The resonance is unmistakable. I have not witnessed such purity in eons," the energy creature added, his voice now soft as distant thunder. Vera finished her soup slowly, savoring each spoonful while her companions watched in respectful silence. The strange phenomena gradually faded, leaving only an elderly alien woman enjoying a simple meal and three very powerful beings looking at a human food vendor with expressions Marcus couldn't interpret. "That was extraordinary," Marcus said finally, breaking the silence. "What exactly just happened?" Vera set down her empty container and studied him with those ancient eyes. "You fed me," she said simply, with kindness, without expectation of reward, asking nothing, but offering what you could. "Do you know how rare such a gift is in this galaxy?" "I just made soup," Marcus protested. It's not magic. It's vegetables and broth, and he trailed off as he realized how inadequate his words sounded. Magic is too small a word. The liquid metal being spoke for the first time, its voice like silver bells. What you have done is something far more precious. You have reminded us what it means to care for one another without thought of gain. Marcus looked around at the small crowd that had gathered to watch the unusual scene. Dozens of beings from as many different worlds, all staring at his humble food truck as if something miraculous had just occurred. He felt the weight of their attention like a physical presence. I don't understand, Marcus said to Vera. Who are you? Who are they? Why does everyone suddenly care about soup? Vera exchanged glances with her companions, some form of silent communication passing between them. The crystalline being nodded slightly, and the energy creature rumbled what might have been approval. Tell me, Marcus Chun, Vera said gently. What do you know of the architects? Marcus frowned, searching his memory. I've heard the name. Ancient aliens, right? Supposed to have built some of the older structures in the galaxy before disappearing mysteriously. Most people think they're myths. Not myths, Vera said softly. History. The architects were the first to achieve true interstellar civilization. They built the foundation upon which all current galactic society rests. The hyperspace lanes, the universal translation protocols, the basic structures that allow thousands of different species to coexist and trade. Okay, Marcus said slowly. But they vanished thousands of years ago, didn't they? Not vanished. The crystalline being corrected. Evolved. Transcended physical form to become something greater. But they left behind certain safeguards. Guardians to watch over what they had built and ensure it was used wisely. A cold realization began to creep up Marcus's spine. Guardians? Vera nodded toward her three companions. Kethvar of the crystal hierarchies. She indicated the crystalline being. Thrumex of the storm worlds. The energy creature inclined his head. And Fluxnina of the liquid realms. The silver being shifted into what might have been a bow. We are the guardians of this sector, Vera explained. Watchers and protectors, ensuring that the younger species develop in harmony rather than destroying themselves and others through greed or hatred. Marcus gripped the edge of his counter, trying to process what he was hearing. And you're telling me this because, Vera said gently, I am more than just another guardian. I'm the last surviving architect, the final living link to those who built the foundations of galactic civilization. And for the first time in millennia, someone has shown me kindness without knowing who I am or what power I possess. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stared at the elderly alien woman who had shuffled up to his truck 3 days ago, looking frail and forgotten, and tried to reconcile that image with what she was telling him. You're an architect, he said weakly. The architect, Kethvar corrected with something like reverence in his crystalline voice. The last of her kind. The ultimate authority over everything the architects created, which includes most of the fundamental infrastructure of galactic civilization. In a very real sense, Thrumex added, she owns the galaxy, not in the crude material way that lesser beings understand ownership, but as the final inheritor of the architect legacy. Marcus sat down heavily on the stool he kept behind the counter. And I gave you free soup. Vera's laugh was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Yes, Marcus Chun, you gave me free soup. You treated me with dignity when I appeared to be nothing more than a hungry old woman. You shared your grandmother's recipe and spoke of love made edible. Do you understand how precious that is to someone who has lived as long as I have, seen as much as I have seen? Around them, the crowd had grown larger, but it remained respectfully quiet. Word was spreading through the station that something extraordinary was happening at the small human food truck. Marcus could see security personnel try and maintain order while obviously struggling to understand what they were dealing with. But why? Marcus asked. Why were you alone? Why did you look like you were barely getting by? Because I wanted to understand, Vera replied. For too long, I have watched galactic civilization from a distance, seeing how species interact when they believe no one of importance is watching. I wanted to experience life as the ordinary beings do, to understand what daily existence feels like for those who don't wield ultimate power. And what did you discover? Marcus asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Loneliness, Vera said simply. Indifference. Most beings are so focused on their own survival and advancement that they have forgotten the simple joy of caring for one another. In 3 years of wandering through the station and countless others like it, you're the first person to offer me something without expecting anything in return. The weight of her words settled over the assembled crowd like a blanket. Marcus could see the effect in their faces, the sudden recognition of their own behavior reflected in her experience. How many of them had walked past Vera without seeing her? How many had actively avoided the strange, old alien woman because she didn't seem important or useful? So what happens now? Marcus asked, genuinely curious and more than a little afraid of the answer. Vera stood slowly, her movements carrying a dignity that seemed to transform the space around her. The shabby clothes she wore began to shimmer, revealing themselves as something far more elegant than they had first appeared. The symbols beneath her skin pulsed with brilliant golden light, and for a moment, Marcus could see her as she truly was, ancient beyond measure, powerful beyond comprehension, and unutterably beautiful. Now, Vera said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in Marcus's bones, I must decide what to do about this galaxy I have inherited. For too long, I have watched civilizations rise and fall, seen kindness become rare, and greed become common. I had begun to think that perhaps the younger species were not ready for the gifts my people left behind. The 3 guardians moved closer, forming a protective circle around her. The air itself seemed to thicken with anticipation. But you have reminded me that goodness still exists, Vera continued, her ancient eyes fixed on Marcus. That even in this cold universe, there are still beings who understand what it means to care for one another. You have given me hope, Marcus-chan. And hope, as it turns out, is the most precious gift of all. She reached into her worn bag and pulled out what looked like the same ordinary credit chip she had tried to pay with 3 days earlier. But now Marcus could see it for what it really was, not a simple payment device, but something that hummed with power and possibilities beyond his comprehension. I would like to make a purchase, Vera said formally. What would you like to buy? Marcus asked, though his voice came out as barely a whisper. Vera smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it reached all the way to her ancient eyes. Everything, she said. I would like to buy everything. And in that moment, as the station's lights flickered and reality itself seemed to bend around the small food truck, Marcus began to understand that his simple act of kindness was about to change not just his life, but the fate of the entire galaxy. The transformation began with silence. Not the absence of sound, but something deeper, a profound quiet that seemed to reach into the fundamental vibrations of reality itself. Every being on Titan Station stopped what they were doing, not because they chose to, but because the universe itself had paused to witness what was about to unfold. Marcus watched in amazement as the small credit chip in Vera's hand began to glow with the same golden light that pulsed beneath her skin. But this was no ordinary illumination. It was pure creation energy, the same force that had shaped stars and birthed worlds. The chip rose from her palm and hung in the air between them, spinning slowly as complex geometric patterns appeared and dissolved around it. When my people, the architects, transcended physical existence, Vera said, her voice now carrying harmonics that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, they left behind a failsafe. A way for their greatest creation to be transferred to someone worthy, should the need ever arise. The golden chip pulsed brighter, and Marcus felt something stir deep in his chest. Not fear, but recognition. As if some part of his soul had been waiting his entire life for this moment. This contains the master algorithm, Vera continued, gesturing to the floating device. The foundational code that governs every hyperlane, every translation matrix, every communication relay, every piece of infrastructure that allows galactic civilization to function. Ownership of this algorithm means ownership of the galaxy itself. Kethvar, the crystalline guardian, stepped forward, his faceted surface reflecting the chip's golden glow in brilliant cascades of light. For 10,000 years, we have waited for the architect to choose a successor. Never did we imagine it would be a human. Humans, rumbled Thrum X, the storm creature, electricity crackling around his massive form, are barely a century into space travel. Their civilization spans, perhaps, 20 worlds. How can one of them be entrusted with the fate of trillions? Fluxnina, the liquid metal being, flowed closer to Marcus, her form shifting between various shapes as she studied him. The choice seems unprecedented. Vera turned to face her guardians, and, for a moment, her true age and power were visible to everyone present. The shabby clothes she wore flickered and revealed themselves as garments woven from starlight itself. The symbols on her skin blazed like miniature constellations, and the air around her shimmered with possibilities that hurt to contemplate directly. Unprecedented, yes, she agreed. But consider what we have witnessed. This human, Marcus Chun, showed kindness to a stranger without thought of reward. He gave freely of what little he had, asking nothing in return. When he learned who I truly was, his first concern was not for power or wealth, but for understanding. These are the qualities my people valued above all others. Marcus found his voice, though it came out rough with emotion. Wait, hold on. I can't. I'm just a guy with a food truck. I don't know anything about running a galaxy. I barely know how to run a business. Vera smiled, and the expression transformed her ancient features into something beautiful and terrible. Do you think my people chose their successors based on administrative experience? The galaxy doesn't need another bureaucrat, Marcus Chun. It needs someone who remembers what it means to care. The floating chip pulsed again, and suddenly Marcus could hear something impossible. The thoughts and dreams of every sentient being within 1,000 light years. The cacophony was overwhelming at first, but gradually he began to distinguish individual voices. A Rigelian child wondering if her parents would return from their mining expedition. A Centaurian poet struggling to find words for the beauty of a nebula. An elderly Proximan feeling forgotten and alone in a retirement facility on a distant moon. This is what ownership truly means, Vera said softly. Not the power to command, but the responsibility to care. The architect algorithm doesn't just control infrastructure. It connects to every living being who uses that infrastructure. Accept it, and you become responsible for their welfare. Marcus staggered under the weight of so many minds, so much need, and hope, and fear, and love. I can't handle this. It's too much. There are too many people. Not people, Fluxnina corrected, her voice like silver bells. Beings. Thousands of species, millions of worlds, trillions of individual lives, each one precious and unique. That's even worse, Marcus gasped, pressing his hands to his temples as the mental voices grew stronger. How can anyone be responsible for so many lives? One at a time, Vera said simply. The same way you've been doing it here on this station. One bowl of soup, one act of kindness, one moment of genuine care. The scale changes, but the principle remains the same. The crowd around them had grown massive, word spreading throughout the station that something unprecedented was occurring. Security forces had given up trying to control the situation, and were simply trying to maintain order while beings from every corner of the galaxy watched history unfold. Marcus could see fear in many faces, but also hope. The idea that ultimate power might be transferred to someone who had shown genuine kindness was both terrifying and wonderful to contemplate. But why me? Marcus asked again. There have to be billions of beings more qualified. Smarter, more experienced, more what? Vera interrupted. More cynical? More calculating? More concerned with their own advancement than with the welfare of others. She gestured to the assembled crowd. Look around you, Marcus. How many of these beings do you think would have offered free soup to a hungry stranger? Marcus really looked at the faces surrounding him. He saw the Thoraxian scrap dealer who had mocked him for his supposed failures. The Andromedran shipwrights who had never bothered to learn his name despite eating at his truck for months. Countless others who had walked past Vera without seeing her, treating her like invisible furniture in their daily lives. That's not fair, Marcus protested. They're not bad people. They're just busy, focused on their own problems. Exactly, Vera said with satisfaction. Even now, knowing what's at stake, your first instinct is to defend them rather than judge them. That compassion, that instinctive understanding that beings are flawed but fundamentally worthy of care. That is why you have been chosen. The golden ship pulsed brighter, and Marcus felt the weight of decision settling on his shoulders like a physical presence. Around him, the mental voices of trillions of beings continued their constant chorus of hopes and fears and dreams. But gradually he began to notice something else in those voices. Patterns. Connections. The Rigelian child's parents were mining rare metals that would be used to build hospitals on a dozen different worlds. The Centaurian poet's words would inspire a young engineer to design better life support systems for deep space exploration. The lonely Proximan's memories contained the key to solving a food shortage on a distant agricultural world. Everyone was connected. Every life touched every other life in ways both subtle and profound. The galaxy wasn't just a collection of separate species competing for resources. It was a vast, complex ecosystem where every being played an essential role. I can see it, Marcus whispered, wonder creeping into his voice. The connections, the way everything fits together. That is the true gift of the algorithm, Vera explained. Not the power to control, but the ability to understand. To see how individual actions ripple across the galaxy, creating waves of consequence that touch countless lives. Kethvar stepped forward again, his crystalline form chiming softly. If you accept this responsibility, Marcus Chun, you will no longer be merely human. The algorithm will transform you, expand your consciousness to encompass the needs of all who depend upon the infrastructure you will control. You will become something new. But you will still be you, Thrumex added, his storm voice softer now. The algorithm enhances, it does not replace. Your humanity, your compassion, your ability to care. These will remain unchanged. Almost corrected, magnified across the galaxy. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of decision pressing down on him like the gravity of a neutron star. In his mind, he could hear his grandmother's voice, the wisdom she had shared during those long afternoons in her kitchen while he learned to cook. Food is love made edible, Marcus, she had said. But more than that, it's hope made real. When you feed someone, you're telling them that they matter, that they're worth caring for. Never forget that power. He opened his eyes and looked at Vera, this ancient being who had wandered the galaxy, searching for someone who still remembered how to care without expectation of reward. If I do this, Marcus said slowly, what happens to everyone else? To the Guardians? To the existing power structures? To the people who are counting on things staying the way they are? The galaxy will change, Vera admitted. But change guided by compassion rather than greed, by understanding rather than fear. The existing governments and corporations will continue to function, but within a framework that prioritizes the welfare of all beings rather than the profit of a few. And you? Marcus asked. What happens to you? Vera's smile was infinitely sad and infinitely beautiful. I have carried this burden for longer than most stars have burnt. I am tired, Marcus Chun. So very tired. If you accept this gift, I will finally be free to rest. The implications of her words hit Marcus like a physical blow. She wasn't just offering him power. She was offering him the chance to grant her the peace she had been seeking for millennia. But I'm scared, Marcus admitted. What if I make the wrong choice? What if I'm not strong enough? Fear is appropriate, Vera said gently. Anyone who would accept such responsibility without fear would be precisely the wrong person for the task. But strength isn't about never failing, Marcus. It's about caring enough to try again when you do. The golden ship pulsed one final time, and Marcus felt the moment of decision crystallize around him. In a mental chorus of trillions of beings, he heard something new, not just their individual voices, but their collective hope. The dream of a galaxy where kindness mattered more than power, where the strong protected the weak instead of exploiting them. Marcus took a deep breath, tasting the recycled air of Titan Station one last time as an ordinary human being. Then, he reached out and touched the floating algorithm chip. The universe exploded into light and possibility. Marcus felt his consciousness expand beyond the bounds of his physical form, stretching across the galaxy in an instant. He could perceive every hyperspace lane, every communication relay, every life support system on every world. More than that, he could feel the beings who depended on those systems, their hopes and fears and dreams flowing through him like a river of pure emotion. But instead of being overwhelmed, Marcus found himself anchored by the simple memory of his grandmother's kitchen, the smell of soup cooking on the stove, and the fundamental truth that caring for others was the highest calling any being could answer. The transformation was complete. Marcus Chun, human food vendor, had become something unprecedented, the first mortal being in 10,000 years to wield the full authority of the architect legacy. And his first thought wasn't about power or control, but about how he could use this gift to ensure that no one in his galaxy ever went hungry again. The first thing Marcus noticed about having cosmic awareness was how surprisingly manageable it felt. He had expected the consciousness of trillions of beings to drive him mad, but instead, it was like being in his grandmother's kitchen during the holidays when dozens of relatives gathered for dinner. Chaotic and overwhelming at first glance, but with clear patterns and rhythms once you learn how to listen. He stood in the same spot beside his food truck on Titan Station, but everything had changed. He could perceive the station not just as a collection of corridors and docking bays, but as a living ecosystem of relationships and dependencies. The Rigelian child he had sensed earlier was 3 sectors away, her worry about her parents creating tiny ripples of anxiety that affected her teacher, who in turn was less patient with other students, creating a cascade of small disturbances that would eventually touch thousands of lives. But Marcus could also see the solutions. A simple message sent through the communication grid could let the child know her parents were safe. A minor adjustment to the mining schedule would bring them home a day early. Such small changes, but the algorithm showed him how they would create ripples of joy and relief that would improve countless lives. "How do you feel?" Vera asked softly. She looked different now, less substantial, as if the transfer of the algorithm had already begun freeing her from the weight of physical existence. "Like I'm cooking for the entire galaxy," Marcus replied, surprised to find himself smiling. "Overwhelming, but in a familiar way. I can see what needs to be done." The 3 guardians exchanged glances that Marcus could now interpret with perfect clarity. They were amazed, concerned, and hopeful in equal measure. The algorithm had chosen well, but the true test would come when he began to act on his newfound awareness. "What will you do first?" Kethvar asked, his crystalline form chiming with curiosity. Marcus closed his eyes and let his consciousness expand, feeling the pulse of galactic civilization like a vast heartbeat. Trade routes carrying essential goods between worlds. Communication networks binding families separated by light years. Life support systems sustaining billions of beings on worlds that couldn't naturally support their species. All of it humming along with the efficient precision the architects had designed, but lacking something essential. "There's no joy in it," Marcus said, opening his eyes. "The whole system works perfectly, but it's cold, mechanical. People use the infrastructure without ever thinking about the connections it creates." He gestured to the crowd, still gathered around his food truck, beings from dozens of species who had never really looked at each other before today. "Look at them. They're all here together, sharing this moment, but tomorrow they'll go back to ignoring each other. The galaxy has the technology to connect every conscious being, but no one remembers how to actually connect." Thrum-X rumbled thoughtfully, electricity crackling around his massive form. The architects built the framework for unity, but they could not force beings to choose unity over isolation. No, Marcus agreed. But maybe I can remind them what they're missing. He reached out with his newfound abilities, touching the algorithm that now flowed through his consciousness like a second bloodstream. The first changes were subtle, adjustments to the communication protocols that would make it easier for beings to find others who shared their interests. Modifications to the translation matrices that would better convey emotional nuance across species barriers. Small shifts to the hyperlane configurations that would encourage cultural exchange rather than simple commerce. But Marcus was thinking bigger than infrastructure modifications. He could feel the loneliness that permeated galactic society, the way beings had become so focused on survival and advancement that they had forgotten the simple pleasure of caring for one another. His grandmother's wisdom echoed in his mind. Food is love made edible. But how do you feed an entire galaxy? The answer came to him with startling clarity. You start with what you know. Marcus turned to address the crowd that had gathered around his small food truck. Beings from every corner of the galaxy, all watching to see what the new architect would do with his unprecedented power. I want to tell you all a story, Marcus began, his voice somehow reaching every ear despite the size of the crowd. When I was a child on Earth, my grandmother taught me to cook. But more than that, she taught me that food is just the excuse we use to take care of each other. A ripple of interest passed through the assembled beings. Many species had similar concepts, though they expressed them differently. She used to say that no one should ever leave her kitchen hungry, not just for food, but for connection, for the feeling of being cared about. Marcus gestured to his humble food truck, which suddenly seemed both insignificant and cosmically important. I've been trying to live by that principle here on this station, but I realize now it's not enough. Not nearly enough. He reached out through the algorithm, touching the consciousness of every being in the crowd, letting them feel for just a moment the connection he could perceive. The gasps of wonder that arose from dozens of species created a harmony that was almost musical. You're all connected, Marcus continued. Every one of you. The Thoraxian scrap dealer sells recycled metal that becomes medical equipment. The Centaurian poet writes verses that inspire engineers to design better life support systems. The human cargo hauler carries medicines that save lives on worlds she's never seen. Every life touches every other life in ways you can't imagine. Crix, the Thoraxian who had mocked Marcus just days earlier, stepped forward from the crowd. His insectoid features were difficult for humans to read, but Marcus's enhanced perception allowed him to sense the genuine confusion and wonder in the being's consciousness. You speak of connection, Crix said, his translated voice carrying an uncertainty that hadn't been there before. But how can we feel what you feel? How can we know these influences we have on others? Marcus smiled, remembering his grandmother's patient explanations when he was too young to understand her wisdom. The same way you learn anything important. One step at a time, one meal at a time, one conversation at a time. He gestured to the beings around him, seeing them not as separate species competing for resources, but as a community that didn't yet know it was a community. What if we started here? What if instead of just buying food and leaving, we shared it? What if instead of eating alone, we ate together? Marcus's consciousness expanded, touching the algorithm with growing confidence. What if we made this station a place where beings come not just to trade goods, but to trade stories? The idea resonated through the crowd with surprising force. Marcus could feel the loneliness that so many of them carried, the isolation that came from being surrounded by strangers in a vast galaxy. But he could also feel their hunger for something more meaningful than mere survival. Vera stepped closer, her ancient form flickering between substance and light. You would start with a space station, with simple meals and conversation. My grandmother always said the kitchen was the heart of any home, Marcus replied. Maybe it's time this galaxy remember how to be a home instead of just a marketplace. Through the algorithm, Marcus reached out to the station's infrastructure. With a thought, he reconfigured the commercial district around his food truck, creating an open plaza where beings could gather comfortably. Tables and Seating arrangements that could accommodate dozens of different physiologies materialized from the station's matter compilers. Lighting systems adjusted to provide the optimal spectrum for every species present. But more than the physical changes, Marcus implemented something unprecedented in galactic infrastructure: the empathy protocol, a subtle modification to the universal translation system that would allow beings to share not just words, but emotions and intentions. Not an invasion of privacy, but an invitation to deeper understanding for those who chose to accept it. "This is your first act as architect?" Fluxnina asked, her liquid metal form shifting with what Marcus now recognized as amusement. "A dinner party?" "The biggest dinner party in galactic history," Marcus corrected. "But starting here, starting small." He looked around at the transformed space, seeing potential where others saw chaos. "Every being who shares a meal here will take something home with them. A memory of connection. A reminder that they're part of something larger than themselves." Kethvar's crystalline form chimed with approval. The architects always believed that the greatest changes begin with the smallest actions. A conversation, a kindness, a shared meal. "But will it work?" Thrumex asked, his storm voice betraying genuine uncertainty. "Can food and conversation really change how an entire galaxy thinks about itself?" Marcus reached out through the algorithm again, feeling the pulse of countless worlds, the rhythm of billions of lives going about their daily routines. He could sense the hunger that went beyond physical need, the desperate desire for meaning, for connection, for the feeling of being part of something beautiful and important. "Look around you," Marcus said to the storm creature. "It's already working." And it was beings who had walked past each other for years without acknowledgement were striking up tentative conversations. The empathy protocol was allowing them to feel the genuine curiosity and goodwill in each other's communications, breaking down the barriers of suspicion and misunderstanding that had kept them isolated. A young Andromedran approached one of the tables, hesitantly taking a seat across from an elderly Proximan. Neither spoke the other's native language fluently, but through the enhanced translation system, they began to share stories about their home worlds, their families, their hopes for the future. Within minutes, their table was joined by a Martian engineer, a Rigelian trader, and a Centaurian artist. The conversation grew richer and more complex as each being added their perspective to the discussion. Marcus watched with growing satisfaction as similar scenes played out across the plaza. "How long will it last?" Vera asked softly. "When the novelty fades, when they return to their normal routines, will they remember this feeling?" Marcus considered the question carefully, using the algorithm to project the potential ripples of this moment across space and time. He could see the beings who were sharing meals tonight returning to their ships and carrying stories of connection to dozens of other worlds. He could see children born generations from now who would grow up in a galaxy where empathy was built into the infrastructure itself. "Change takes time," Marcus said finally, "but it takes root. Every person who experiences genuine connection tonight will remember what it feels like. They'll seek it out again, create it in their own communities. And slowly, one meal at a time, the galaxy will remember how to be a family." Vera nodded slowly, her form becoming more translucent as the algorithm fully transferred to Marcus. "Then, my watch has ended," she whispered. "I can finally rest, knowing that the legacy of my people is in good hands." As she spoke, her form began to dissolve into points of golden light, each mote carrying with it a fragment of ancient wisdom and 10,000 years of accumulated love for the beings she had protected. The lights swirled around Marcus for a moment, and he felt the full weight of her gratitude and trust settling into his consciousness. "Thank you," her voice echoed one final time, "for reminding me that kindness is the greatest power in the universe." And then she was gone, leaving behind only the warm scent of starlight and the memory of an ancient being who had found peace in a simple bowl of soup shared with a human who understood what it meant to care. Marcus stood alone with the three guardians in the center of the bustling plaza, watching the galaxy begin the slow process of remembering how to love itself. It would take time, patience, and countless small acts of kindness. But for the first time in his life, Marcus felt truly at home among the stars.